All right. My goodness, great googly moogly. This week we have on the Vinyl Guide drumming legend, heavy metal maniac, and coffee magnate, Charlie Benante, founding member of Anthrax. Charlie, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I like the coffee magnet thing. That's
Well,
pretty fun.
well, absolutely. Well, that's one of the things you're involved in, and I know you're passionate about. So we will talk about that shortly, as well as the music you made over the last 30 years. But before we talk about that, let's go back a bit. When did young Charlie Benante start banging on the pots and pans?
That's exactly how I started banging on pots and pans, and that's we're not even exaggerating on that. But when I was really, really young, I mean, we're talking three years old, around that time, my mom said that she has pictures of me actually doing it, and then once I got to five, my dad got me a real kit to play on, and that was it. I was pretty much on my way.
It was your family supported you. Was it a musical family? Did your parents or brothers and sisters play?
Um, no, but my it was all like on my mom's side of the family. Um, my grandfather, he was, of course, from Italy, and he would play like mandolin and other things, and I think that side of the family was very musical and really artistic too, because my mom used to draw and stuff like that. So I think I got all of it from her side of the family.
Okay, so they had an appreciation, and they knew you had something you had to express, and and thank God for that because not many parents are going to put up with a 5-year-old with a drum kit.
Wow, tell me about it. I had four older sisters who thank God they were just as supportive, or else they probably would have lost their minds.
And drums was obviously first, but a lot of people may not know is you also play quite a bit of guitar on a lot of the recordings. Of course, later in life, did you pick up guitar when you were young as well, or is that something that came much later?
I picked up the guitar when I was around 13, 14 years old because I just realized at the time that there's no way I could convey what was in my head to another guitarist or a keyboardist if it's just me behind the drums. I mean, so I had to teach myself how to play another instrument, and luckily it was guitar. So I just picked it up and kind of watched other people. I mimicked my other favorite guitarists at the time and just learned those songs, and that was it. I was kind of on my way.
So is a necessity for you to communicate with the others in your band. What music did you have as a boy?
I mean, when I was really, really young, I guess the music that was in the house was going to be what my sisters were listening to, and then my next door neighbors. Ironically, I had four older sisters, and on the other side of us was our neighbors who had three boys, and I had basically, I was listening to what my sisters listened to, and then I would hear what they would listen to too. So, my sisters were into everything from, of course, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to the Doors, and then my neighbors were into similar things like that. But I just picked up all of it. You know what I mean? I was just such a sponge back then, just, absorbing as much as I possibly could out of it all. And I remember they would go to parties and stuff like that. And if one of my sisters had to watch me, well, guess who got brought to the party? And guess who got thrown up on the drums, when he was younger. So these are the things that I remember doing that type of stuff. You know what I mean?
So you were what, maybe 8 or 9 when you had your first live gig?
Yeah, I was 5 years old when I had my first live gig because my dad enrolled me in this music school that would, um, put you together with other um, children or whoever it was, and they would make a band out of the kids who enrolled in the school. So I got thrown into a band with like 12, 13, 15-year olds. And I remember playing like venture songs and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty complex stuff. I mean, I'm not sure I could play it at 40 something, let alone five. That's quite good. So,
Yeah.
so you had the influence of your sisters and your neighbors and whatnot, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and probably some of the, some of the sappy stuff you hear on the radio. What band or what record did you discover that became your music?
Well, I would still have to say the Beatles were the ones who completely were driving me to to do what I was going to do, because those Beatle records at the time, I would just get lost in that, sitting there looking at the White Album, and just listening to it. And I was always amazed at how the Beatles could transform themselves into the Mop Top Beatles, and then they were Sergeant Pepper, and then they became like these kind of long-haired, kind of hippie type Beatles, and when I look back on all that stuff nowadays, I should really do a course in Beatles 101, because I can break down so many different forms of music that were derived from Beatle music. Everything from pop music to heavy metal, to even grunge, to the kind of light pop that you hear. I mean, it's all stems from the Beatles, I think.
Yeah, it's really, when you think about it, it's really incredible what they did, what those four guys did in what, 7 or 8 years? Yeah.
8 years, which is it's astounding to think about that. The timetable of when the Beatles were together and what they accomplished and how they changed the world and music within the world. You know what I mean? They brought in Indian music. They brought in so many different types of elements into those 8 years and really educated so many. Until this day, I think they're still educating us. I was having this conversation about 2 weeks ago with me, Chris Jericho, and Mike Portnoy. We always do this podcast about the Beatles, and we did this 50th Sgt. Pepper thing. And at the time, I said, this album is 50 years old, and this record right now is better than anything that's in the top 100 in the Billboard charts.
That's true. It's infinitely more interesting. And can anyone really name a bad Beatles song?
Well, we could name a bad. We have a thing. We have a list of bad Beatles songs, but we don't really like to discuss that. But "Act Naturally" is one of them that we always bring up.
the Ringo catalog.
Hey, don't get me wrong. Ringo is awesome. Ringo has some of the most well-known songs of the Beatles, and if you break up the Beatles solo projects, Ringo sold the most records. So there you go.
Yeah. He was needed. He was kind of like a bit of a palate cleanser, I think, because whenever they would get artistic and serious, and sometimes they would go so far out, and then you need someone like Ringo to come back with Yellow Submarine to once again just ground everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing that stands out to me always is the they gave Ringo A Little Help from My Friends, which I don't think that song was one of the songs that, we have to give Ringo. That song is the second song you hear on that record, and it's probably one of the more important songs on that record. The hooks in that song alone, it just floors me. And they gave that song to Ringo, and it's just it's one of the best songs on that record.
So Ringo clearly inspired you from a drumming perspective. Who were the other drummers you were listening to?
Back in the day, I would listen to the John Bonhams. I was a Keith Moon fan, but I wasn't so crazy about Keith Moon as I was about John Bonham. And there was a drummer from Jethro Tull, Barrymore Barlow, who I thought was awesome. And just most of the stuff that was coming out of England for me was having a big, big effect on me.
What do you think was different from the English drummers than stuff that was on the other side of the Atlantic?
I think they were more. They were expressing themselves a bit more, and I just think that you have someone like Ginger Baker who came out, and I think really influenced a lot of the American drummers. Me being, I wasn't one of them. I really didn't get the whole Ginger Baker thing. Like I said, I was more into the. I thought Ringo was awesome back in the day. Like those early Beatles songs and the footage when you see Ringo and them playing live, fucking Ringo was just, rocking out. And I know later on you said that they were becoming terrible musicians because they couldn't hear themselves. But if you watch those early performances, and he's just swinging, and he's just so good back then, So he was one, and of course, like I said, John Bonham was another one. And more importantly about the John Bonham thing was his sound, the sound of his drums, the way he tuned them. I mean, I know he was a big jazz fan, and he loved like the James Brown drummers, and you could hear the tones in his drumming, more like the James Brown type of drummers. And John Bonham was just awesome, just awesome. Totally played for the song, and then he just sweetened it up with his flavor. It was just one of the greatest.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And even some of the bootlegs. John Bonham as a live drummer was 10 times the guy he was in the studio. He would really experiment, really take chances. Some of those bootlegs that you hear of Led Zeppelin, especially kind of in that period between 73 and 76, man, what a monster.
Yeah, I mean, I've been collecting Zeppelin bootlegs since I was younger. Vinyl, and then of course then they went to CD and stuff like that. I probably have one of the bigger collections of Zepp vinyl, and some of my favorites to this day are the soundboard ones that they recorded a lot of the shows that way too. And there's 23-minute versions of Dazed and Confused that are just leave your jaw just dropping. You know what I mean? And the thing I loved about that band is how they all worked off of each other. Jimmy would do something to trigger something, and then Bonham would do something to trigger, something, and then they'd go into another groove, and it was just amazing. And the way I feel about Led Zeppelin is, of course, there was a huge audience there to watch them, but I always felt like they were just playing to themselves.
Yeah. They would have given the same performance if it was a stadium of 14,000 or 140 people in a pub.
Exactly. I love that vibe.
Did you ever see them live?
No, I don't want to talk about it. It's like my mom wouldn't let me go with my cousin, but she let me go see David Bowie. Go figure.
Oh, well, that's not bad. At least you got one of those two. What other live bands did you see? Because you were in the New York area during the 70s. What David Bowie? Who else did you see live?
David Bowie was my first ever concert. I saw, going back a while now, I got to remember all these. Kiss was always a big one, and my sister took me to see Kiss for the first time in '76, and then she took me every time after that to see them. I saw Black Sabbath. I saw. I never got to see Queen, which was another one that I really wish I got to see. But And then when I was old enough to go on my own, then I would just go all the time to see it, as much as I possibly could, everything from, Rush to UFO to, I remember the first time Iron Maiden came, they played New York, and this is with Paul Di'Anno, so we were all flipping out. And they opened up for Judas Priest, and those were the more rowdier shows back in the day.
Did you ever get into punk?
I was a huge fan of punk. My favorite bands, of course, growing up, I was such a into the whole rock thing, but I loved the Sex Pistols and the Clash and Generation X. That was one of my favorite. Billy Idol's first band. I loved Generation X.
And I imagine being on the East Coast, you had plenty of Ramones shows to take in?
Saw the Ramones probably 3 times. And one time, ironically, I saw them in Switzerland on a night off when Anthrax was on tour. Back in when we would first tour, I think it was like 1985 or something, or 86. Like one of our first times over to Europe. And we had a night off, and the Ramones were playing, and we went to see the Ramones.
So this time you're soaking it in. You're practicing your drums, of course. You're probably forming bands. You're hearing all these great live acts. Was Anthrax your very first band?
No. No. One of the bands I was in when I was around 16 years old, was a band that played the club circuit, and I would play with them on weekends, and sometimes we would do like 4 sets a night, and it was such a vast array of stuff. It was just a set of like new wave type of stuff, and then we do a set of like progressive rock with serious, like heavy stuff. We're talking like Yes, UK, Kansas, just music like that. And then, of course, a set of The Who. It was just so much. It was like a jukebox, and I would have to learn all these tunes. And it really helped to develop my chops, my style, whatever, playing all these different type of songs.
So you eventually did join Anthrax, obviously, replacing one of their first drummers. I still refer to you as a founding member, even though I think you missed the first 6 months or so.
Yeah.
When Anthrax was still a budding band, you guys had someone you had to impress, a guy John Zazula, who ran a record store in New Jersey, Rock and Roll Heaven, I believe. He was kind of the go-to guy on the East Coast, right? He was.
Yeah.
John started Megaforce Records, and you guys kept trying to get his attention. How many times did you have to go back and forth before Anthrax finally got his approval?
Well, I would say the first demo of the band, like when I heard some of the songs that, when I had to learn some of the songs, I thought some of the songs that they had sounded a bit, I don't know, they needed work. So when Johnny Z said the same thing to them, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe he hears something that I heard, Mm-hmm. And then once I got into the band, we started, I think when I came in, I played the songs differently. I played them with a different attitude, and played them with a different feel, speed, you know what I mean? So I think it definitely kicked it up a notch, So then we would rehearse 5 nights a week. I'm not kidding. Every night we would be in that room doing stuff, writing new material. And, that's when I started to show my ideas to Scott and stuff. And then we started to have songs like Metal Thrashing Mad, Death Rider. Because when I first came into the band, they already had a song called Panic. They had a song called Howling Furies. They had a song called Anthrax. So when I came in the band, we started writing Death Rider, Metal Thrashing Mad, a song that would become Subjugator, Death from Above. So the style, the sound was changing, and that's when Zazula became interested.
At that time, Did you know you had something quite unique?
No, no, I don't think we really felt we had something until these newer tunes were kind of taking over the older tunes, you know what I mean? And then things started to take shape, I think. And he became interested, and then it was sometime after that where I think we all felt that I think we're on the right path here, you know?
And this was your guys' full attention, 5 nights a week. There weren't other bands you were kind of working with or had irons and other fires. It was all focused on Anthrax.
Well, for me, I was in art school at the time, and that's the only thing that I was really focused on.
Was that your fallback plan?
That was my fallback plan.
So if Anthrax hadn't worked out, what career would you have had, do you think?
I would have definitely tried my best to get into the, comic book graphic, is something in that world. Maybe advertising. I mean, I don't know where it would have led me, but that is where my main focus was on besides the music.
So fair enough. So anyway, it did work out great for you. So John Zazula signed you guys up to Megaforce, and there was a 7-inch Soldiers of Metal that was released. 3,000 copies, I believe. Do you still have a copy of that 7-inch?
I do.
Yeah. How did it feel as a young man to finally have your music on a record?
My biggest thing was, of course, when we went in to do that, we were working with this guy, Ross the Boss, who was in this band called Manowar. I think we felt, we're working with Ross the Boss, this, blah, blah, blah. He's in Manowar. So we were getting a taste of someone who's been doing this for a while. And I remember it was a good experience working with him. I remember being really nervous about going into the studio to record for the first time a real song. And I remember being a little apprehensive about, should I be playing as much as I am in this song? Because, I want to make sure it's a good take, because the song Soldiers of Metal just had this pattern with the kick drums, which at the time it wasn't so easy, and I remember lifting a part of it from a Judas Priest song called Rock Forever. And then I just kind of changed it a little bit and sped it up and then made it Soldiers of Metal. So yeah, we were just kids at that time, just going in and recording. It was a real studio, and I was loving it.
Was it just you just record a couple songs just for the 7-inch, or was it part of a larger recording session with, preparation?
No, that was it. It was that was it. We just recorded that, and then used an older version of Howling Furies on the B side. I didn't even play on it because the drums were already recorded, and we only had enough money to record that.
Yeah. So interestingly, that version of Howling Furies is the only, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's the only officially released Anthrax song without you on the drums.
That is true. Yes.
Ah, okay, good. All right. I got my nerd hat on now. So once you guys made Fistful of Metal, I got a question that you probably get quite a bit. The album art on Fistful of Metal. Who did that?
I hate it. Okay, so that's also the one album cover that I had nothing to do with. Everything else after that, I did every single one. But that one I had nothing to do with, and that was an idea that it was a collective idea, and I think the singer at the time, Neil Turbin, had more or less the idea for it. But I think it didn't go well with the artist who was supposed to do it. I just think it's all wrong, and it's not the way it was intended.
I'm not even sure what's happening there. Is the guy's getting punched in the face, right? Or is he biting something?
He's supposed to be getting punched from the back of his head.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be coming out of the front of his mouth, which if you look at it, that's not what's happening on the cover. And I remember when we first got it and we spent all our money for this, and we were all pretty disappointed.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, thank God you stepped in for the rest of the album covers. Now, around this time, a lot was happening for Megaforce. Metallica was on the East Coast recording Kill 'Em All around this time, and you guys were essentially all living together. How did that come to be that you guys were all in the same house?
Well, what happened was Johnny Zazula, he brought Metallica to New York to record what would become Kill 'Em All. They needed somewhere to stay, and Scott at the time got them a place, and they were staying in a room in the music building, and of course we would, help them and stuff with other things. And I remember one time Kirk was staying at one of Scott's friends' place, and his eye was all fucked up, and we had to take him to like some doctor to get his eye checked, and they gave him some drops and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, we were just helping them out, and they were great guys, and we just kind of became friends.
I think over the years we've come to learn the characteristics of Lars and James and, of course, Kirk, but not a lot about Cliff, unfortunately. What kind of guy was Cliff?
I thought Cliff was a pretty funny guy, pretty quiet at times, but also pretty funny. I just think he was different than the rest. He had a certain look about him that was different. He wasn't very, he wasn't looking like everyone else back in the day. He was definitely an individual. Everything from his bell-bottom pants to his, just the way he dressed. And he would not wear typical metal shirts or other type of shirts. He would wear oyster cult shirts and stuff like that. And he was into horror and stuff. And he was just I don't know. I just always felt really comfortable and good around him, just hanging out,
He seemed to be a guy who's very comfortable with himself. I mean, everyone else is wearing leather, and he's just wearing what he wants to. He has his own style. So he seems like a pretty down-to-earth guy.
I mean, he just seemed like later on getting to know a lot of people from that area in San Francisco and knowing the history that came before it, he just looked like someone who was a product of that, But he had a real good sense musically about things, you know what I mean? I really think he was a musician first, then a kind of rock star after.
Going forward with Anthrax, you guys recorded Spreading the Disease, and then there was some leftover studio time that you guys decided to use to record Stormtroopers of Death. Do I have that story right?
That's right. And what happened with that was Scott stayed up in Ithaca, New York for the whole thing. I mean, we're talking downtime, everything. He just stayed up there. And all of us, we kind of split, went back home and stuff like that. And he was, there was a magazine called Soldier of Fortune. And that's where a lot of the SOD logo came from, that magazine. And then he was drawing like his version of Sergeant D, and he would put up a piece of paper and says, Sergeant D says, "Don't come in now, we're mixing," or something like that. Anyway, Sergeant D became this character. Around that time, we finished recording Spreading the Disease, and we were up there in Ithaca doing nothing. We had this idea of doing a side project. The side project originally consisted of me, Scott, and Frankie, and I think Scott was going to do the singing on it, and it was called The Diseased. And it was just a straight up punk band, like modeled after Discharge, GBH, that type of punk rock. So anyway, long story short, we recorded some stuff, didn't do anything for us. We just left it. So we were friends with Billy Billy Milano, who was down in CBGB's, and he had his band called the Psychos. And we always liked Billy, but he was a bass player. He wasn't a frontman singer. And Scott convinced him to do the singing on it. And then at the time, I think Scott and myself felt really bad about how Danny Lilker was, kicked out of the band. And we wanted to work with him again because we really liked Danny a lot. But he was kicked out of the band primarily from our singer, Neil Turbin. Danny got involved. We started writing a bunch of these tunes. We recorded it, mixed it over a weekend up in Ithaca. During that time, we also recorded this other thing called the Crab Society North demo, which was just basically just noisy music, but it was definitely extreme for its time. I mean, it was just crazy. So anyway, SOD was born. And I remember leaving, going home, and taking a copy of the mix. And I remember being on a Greyhound bus from Ithaca, New York to, the Bronx, New York, and listening over and over to this record, which was Speak English or Die. And just laughing my ass off because it was so easy and it was such a simple thing to do, but it was so great. And then I remember going home and then doing the album cover. And that was it. Just pretty much do it yourself. And that's the way we did it.
Now, did you draw the album cover? I always assumed it was Scott because he made that.
No, I did it.
Oh, you did it. Okay.
Yeah, I did it.
And John Zazula heard the demo, heard what you guys recorded, and he was ready to put it out.
Yeah.
Are you surprised at the longevity of that album?
It had a life of its own. I mean, it was one of the albums that completely did this crossover from metal to hardcore to punk to metal. And I really think it was the bridge that founded what would become a lot of music that kind of was created because of something like this.
It became the theme for the MTV Headbangers Ball. How did that come about?
Correct. They just liked it. It had nothing to do with us. They just picked a bunch of songs and was using them as like what they would call bumpers. And it became that. And we were thrilled with that,
Did they let you know, or one day you were just watching MTV Headbangers Ball and you're like, holy shit, that's our song?
It's exactly how it happened.
It just became iconic. Now, obviously, the content of the album, it's not to be taken seriously, but I imagine quite a few people do. Do you take flack for the title or any of the content of that record?
In my experience with being in this thing, I remember 2 or 3 situations that happened, and that was it.
So, by all accounts, most people get the joke.
Well, you also have to remember nowadays everyone is just so politically correct that I don't know. It's just like I don't know. I don't even know I don't even know how people go about it anymore with the I mean, back in New York, back in the day, when you would go into a store and you couldn't even understand the way someone was talking, and it was just hard to communicate. And it was frustrating at the time, but nowadays you can't say that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you come off as, oh, you're a racist, or
But it's not even the title, Speak English or Die, but we're also talking things, songs like Kill Yourself, which, you're not, you're being flippant about that. You're not being serious about it, but someone who's ultra sensitive can see that as some sort of affront.
Yeah.
Much more these days than they can. I mean, look, we had Tesco V of the Meatmen on the show not too long ago, and they had songs like "Crippled Children Suck" and that sort of thing, and it's all meant to be a goof. It's like It's like a comic book or a movie. You're not meant to really think that, Tom Cruise is a Nazi. It's just kind of part of the act for that piece of art.
Well, yeah. I mean, at the time, I don't think we were thinking about art.
Mm.
I think we were just doing it. You know what I mean? I don't think we were thinking much about it.
So after Stormtroopers of Death, did you guys do much touring for that album?
No, no, not much at all. And one of the reasons for it is because spreading the disease was taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And we had signed a deal with Island Records, so we had, a huge push behind us. And it was kind of like, oh shit, but this other record's doing well, and it was like, you know what I mean? Our first priority was the Anthrax thing because a lot of money was invested in it by Island. So, yeah, we had to just, when we had time to do some SOD stuff, we did it. Even that was becoming a bit of a problem with some of the guys in the Anthrax. They didn't want Scott and I to kind of abandon the Anthrax thing to go do this newfound, thing. So it was a bit of a tough one back then.
I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Stormtroopers of Death was always meant to be a very limited shelf life, a small project. Perhaps the way I interpreted it was something that you guys were blowing off steam with. Were you surprised that it got larger than it intended?
I was shocked at the but it was just the vibe and it was the right timing for that record. Because it was speaking about like this type of music. I just think the youth, especially in America, just wanted to fucking thrash and just kind of, and like I said before, there was a bridge from the hardcore fans to the metal fans. And I just think it started to become something that you really couldn't ignore anymore. And we were accepted by those people, which is a big thing,
What do you think, when you look back, what do you think was happening in society that made the youth gravitate towards thrash metal?
Because I think it was music for the people who were getting into certain music. It's like, I really believe that the new wave of British heavy metal that happened really was the I'm not going to say it was the cause of this type of music, meaning thrash metal, but I really think it was the catalyst for, let's face it, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, and then one of my favorite bands that come out of England was this band called Venom. And Venom was they played in a punk rock way, but they had this kind of metal aesthetic. And you had the guitar player in Venom who wanted to be Eddie Van Halen, but you had the singer who was just this, Kronos was like, he was different than your other singers or other frontmen. And I totally got it. Just the same way Lemmy was. They weren't these pretty guys. They were fucking ugly and they were mean. And I just think that it resonated with a lot of the punk rock fans who were into Motorhead and were into Venom, which is the same thing that I was into. So to me, thrash metal was spawned because of bands like that.
Do you feel in that time period in the 80s, the youth, and I'll say young men mainly because I think that's most of the gigs at that time are sausage fests, that there was a displacement or there was a feeling of not belonging elsewhere that had them a little bit more aggressive and into that sort of aggressive sound?
Well, there was the mainstream music, of course, was always there, but there was this other form of music that I think because politically speaking, I think this was the time of Reagan, and a lot of your punk hardcore bands had a topic. Um, we never really got into it politically, as much as the other bands did. But there was this kind of vibe going on, and I think I appreciated a lot of what was going on in the punk hardcore world, what they were talking about, what they were singing about. I remember Suicidal Tendencies had a song called "I Shot Reagan," and I thought that was pretty heavy at the time, And I always thought, like, wow, these bands are totally covering something that we're not covering. And they were very political in the way that they were expressing themselves. Whereas us, metalheads, we weren't doing that much. You know what I mean? We were singing about, everyday life and chicks. So it was a different thing when going to write lyrics for Anthrax, and this was back in the time when I took over doing most of the music and Scott took over doing the lyrics. And I could tell he was like kind of on that. He was somewhere in the middle of going political and going the other way too. So he was always into different things like Stephen King and, not too much into the fantasy world like of other types of metal would go. We wanted to speak about things that maybe did affect us in a sense.
So it's interesting that the big breakthrough hit for Anthrax was a semi-political song, Indians.
Yep.
Was that a willful leap, or was that it just happened to be that song where everything came together?
Originally I had this idea for this song, and it had the music lent itself, of course, to Indians. And I remember we met some fans on our one of our tours who were Native Americans, and I don't know if that stayed or subconsciously just remained in my mind or in Scott's mind. And we discussed it. I remember being at his house in Bayside, Queens, and writing what would become Indians, and he liked the topic and he liked the idea of it, and he just ran with it.
So there was the discussion, here's a topic, here's a space we could explore, and then went to these separate corners and came back with something to work on.
With something to work on, exactly. And usually, the wheels were spinning, and a lot of times I would be thinking of something and he would be thinking of something, and sometimes the ideas would match and we would hit it, right, hit the nail right on the head.
At this time, you guys were also, this is around 86-ish, I believe, 87. Rap was starting to, make itself very well known. I think you guys probably had more of a front seat than the rest of the country or world, being on the East Coast. How would you describe your first involvement with rap and how that influenced not just your music, but also Anthrax?
Well, okay, this was probably back in 85, maybe even as early as late 84, where some of us in the band, myself included, started to get into certain types of rap music, notably Run DMC. And for some reason, it just resonated. And then discovered some other stuff too. At that time, a friend of ours started working for Def Jam and Rush Management, and we would hang out all the time and go down to Def Jam and just be a part of that whole thing and hearing what was about to come. And, like everything from LL Cool J. And then one day I remember going in there and I met Chuck D. Now, Public Enemy didn't have anything out at the time, Chuck was just there doing like a mail order type of thing, getting people ready for Yo Bum Rush show. And I remember that record, and then there was a Beastie Boy 12-inch, which She's On It, which I thought was great. So it was the earlier side of what was rap music. And the thing about rap music at the time is they were sampling rock songs, you know? So how can you not like it? So basically, I just got into it, and Scott got into it, and I think Frankie got into it too. And we wanted to do our version, so we wrote this song called I'm the Man. Mm-hmm. And the original idea for that song was the Beastie Boys were going to do the rapping on it, and we were just going to do the music. And our schedules could never line up. And it came crunch time, and we needed to record it, so the three of us did it. And we basically did our best impersonation of the Beastie Boys. Oh. And that's how it happened.
That's interesting. Okay, so the Beastie Boys were on board, but this, due to scheduling issues, which obviously is a concern, it became you guys doing it.
Exactly. That's exactly how it went.
And Public Enemy in the song Bring the Noise, they said the term wax is for Anthrax. I'm assuming that was directed toward you. How did you guys get in the was that a surprise to you?
That was a big surprise to us. But on that whole tour that we did, we're talking that whole Among the Living tour, Scott's stage shirt for that, most of that tour was a Public Enemy shirt. Mm-hmm. Chuck D saw pictures of it everywhere. He name checked us in the song Bring the Noise. That's how that happened.
Okay. All right. Understand. And then you guys did some work with UTFO. Any other rap artists you guys collaborated with? Obviously before the big Public Enemy one.
No. That was it. And, you know, the thing about us is after the Public Enemy thing, people expected us to go that route, but we never had any intentions on going that route. We were a heavy metal band. And if we couldn't do something that was better than Bring the Noise, then there's no way we were going to touch it.
Real quick, jumping forward a bit here. While recording Persistence of Time, there was a fire in the Anthrax rehearsal studio. All the gear, or most of the gear, was gone. Were there any tapes or recordings or things that were also lost in that fire?
No, there wasn't any real, things like that. It was more so just gear, equipment, guitars, drums, stuff like that. Nothing, no tapes or anything went up.
Are you guys a band that keeps a lot of the tapes and the old... Are you romantic about that sort of thing? Keeping all the T-shirts and the memorabilia and that sort of thing, storing it?
That's me. That's my department. I always keep one of everything. And then, like I just did this, I've been doing these series of anniversary records. So I did of course we did Among the Living, a deluxe edition. I did a Spreading the Disease that came out, which Sean worked on. And then we just finished the State of Euphoria one that will be out for the 30th anniversary. So, yeah, I have everything from, rehearsals to demos to everything, I try and keep all that stuff.
Okay, so you've got like a 2 or 3 car garage that's just jam full of boxes.
Yeah.
Is there any order to it, or is that something that you'll have to get to someday?
Me order? No way.
It's piles of crap. How many outtakes or other songs or unreleased Anthrax material is there in those boxes or out there in the wild?
Oh, there's quite a few. I mean, I sent Sean a bunch of stuff for the next one, which would be Persistent, which the anniversary for that is not for a few years. So I have time to find more,
So it sounds like you're on a bit of a cadence, the 30-year anniversaries. You did Spreading the Disease, upcoming State of Euphoria. So that's kind of what you guys are on, 30-year anniversaries.
It's coming up on that. I mean, I would love to do a remix version of some of the records too. Um, Maybe somewhere down the line we would do something like that. You know,
What is your favorite Anthrax record?
I don't have one. I really don't have a favorite. They all, bring back memories and bring back moments, and um, it's like a lot of the tattoos that I have um, bring back a memory or a moment of where I was at the time, and I look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's right, that's where I was then. So musically speaking, I look back at those records and I try and remember, moments from what happened
Mm-hmm.
from, conception to, the evolution of the record and the evolution of me as a person during that record, because you always go through some sort of change in life during the 2 year, 3 year cycle of a record, and I'm talking like from writing the record to the last show of that tour. You always change a bit as a person, and how can't you? You're experiencing life again in such a way that nobody else does. I mean, normal people are getting up and going to work. With us, we're going to different countries. We're going to different states. We're meeting people every day that we would never meet. And some people, and some of these things have a huge effect on you as a person, and you grow from it. You take things from it and you become a different person.
What is the record? Because there's been, obviously variances in, acceptance and sales and listenership across the catalog. What's the Anthrax record that I guess broke your heart? What's the one you think people really need to go back and listen to?
Wow. Well, I feel like I wrote a lot of good material on the Sound of White Noise record, and that was a different time for us. Of course, we had a different singer at the time, John, and I think it was one of those watershed moments. I would love to go back and rediscover that record, and I don't know, play with it. Same way I'd like to go back and rediscover the State of Euphoria record and maybe play with it a little more, um, change it up a little bit here and there.
Do you feel Sound of White Noise or State of Euphoria or other records, they got released too soon?
The end result of the Sound of White Noise, I don't think it was the record that, at least me, I don't think it was the record that I thought we were going to make. I mean, we worked with a producer at the time who was, hot on the heels of like what would become grunge. And I think he made that record sound a bit like some of those bands. It definitely has a different tone to it. And I think if you break that record down to its rawest form and maybe remix that record, I think it would sound closer to Persistence of Time than what it came out sounding like.
So when you think about your catalog, Persistence of Time is the high watermark in your mind about the level of satisfaction for the end result?
Well, the Persistence of Time record is the answer to the shit that we were dealing with State of Euphoria. When you see, Among the Living, we were the darlings of the press, especially overseas. we at the time couldn't do anything wrong. And then we had a backlash from when State Euphoria came out. They were just looking for shit to kind of bring us down, to everything from picking on us for what we were wearing to smiling in photos, which is it's very true. We were asked, why do you always smile in photos? And we were just like, because we're fucking happy about things. I mean, it was like so ridiculous, the shit that we were dealing with, that's the reason why Persistence became such a dark record.
So I guess the real big question that a lot of people want to know is, Charlie, is there going to be another Anthrax album?
If you asked me that question a year ago, I would have said, I don't know, I don't know, because that's the truth. I don't know. Now, here I am, and I got that itch again, to create something. So I would probably say, of course, I think there will be another Anthrax record, but I want it to be a different record than maybe the last one was. I mean, I want to follow along the same lines, but I want to make it maybe a little more experimental, maybe a little more let the song be the song it wants to be, and let's not do any abbreviation. If a fucking song wants to be 7-minute song, let that song be 7 minutes long.
So more of an organic approach.
I don't want to think about things like radio and stuff like that. I really don't. There's bands out there who are radio favorites. I don't know. I mean, we cracked a bit of radio with this last record. I just don't know if we're ever going to be one of those type of bands that, I don't know. It's like, you have to understand, I mean, here in America, I mean, what radio is. It's terrible.
Does it still have the influence that you need? I mean, does it matter if you get something on the radio or not these days?
I really think it does. I still think that we're in a time where mainstream, okay? How do you think these fucking bands like, oh geez, I caught myself. I almost went off on some bands and I.
You almost named names. That's okay. I think we all know who you're thinking. So, but does that really matter for Anthrax, for the fan base that you guys have? Does it really matter to be able to have a song on the radio? I mean, look, I guess there are songs like a Taylor Swift sort of kind of heavy rotation top 10, but I think you guys are playing in a different field there.
I'm not looking towards that type of radio. I'm talking about other forms of radio in different cities, different states that you turn on their local rock station or whatever the fuck it is, and you hear Godsmack over and over again. That's the radio I'm talking about. There's no reason why our last record shouldn't be played right after that. Okay, that's my point.
Okay, so radio is important.
It's very.
Okay.
I remember having this argument during the last record, like, or maybe the song is too long for radio, and I remember saying, "Who gives a fuck about radio?" But there's another side of me that has to be that type of person where I go, we need to maybe have something that is short enough that if radio did want to play it, it would be okay, because you don't want them to go and edit down a fucking 6-minute song and then the song isn't even the song anymore. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I just think you need other tools to help you to achieve your goals. I mean, that's basically what I'm saying. I look at some of these festivals that we play, and these bands are being played on rock radio, and I see when they play a song, and I just see the mass of people who are like behind it. And I'm like, wow, So with us, it's always been a record sold was a ticket sold. But I just think that you get to a point where you want to achieve different goals too. You know what I mean?
So back to the thinking of the new record, you want to have an organic process to developing it. Let the songs breathe. Let them take whatever time they need to. But at the same time, you may have to balance it out with, something, one or two things that could make it to the radio.
Exactly. And I always said, and I think we've always been the type of band that said, we're not going to go out and write a song for that. If something happens, that's how it is organically. If it happens, then great. Let's do it. But I'm not going to sit there and pour fucking maple syrup over a fucking tune. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not going to happen.
You're not going to have a guest spot from Adele.
Oh yeah.
Fair enough. So Charlie, this has been a great conversation. We really appreciate you spending some time. You're also in the coffee business, I understand. You've got your own blends of coffee that are available at charliebenante.com. What led you to conclude that the coffee business is something that you want to get behind?
The thing about coffee is, like, I love coffee so much. I've loved it since I was a little kid. And then one day, Dave Mustaine reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting this coffee thing. Would you be on board with doing it too?" And I said, "Absolutely, let's do it." So we did it, and it was fun while it lasted a bit, but it kind of fell. Mm-hmm. And we didn't do it anymore, but I still had that itch. So I found a roaster, and I just did it very, very independently on my own. And I just wanted people to taste the coffee that I thought was a good coffee. You know what I mean? Something that really gives you a kick when you sip it. And I started it, and it's been going on for a couple of years now. And then a company here in Chicago, Dark Matter, we just did a merger, and now they're going to start carrying my coffee. And I'm really excited about that.
Is this like coffee that, because I love coffee too, and I'm just wondering if this is the type of cup that I'm going to drink a cup and it's going to be like turbocharged. It's going to like be a huge kick in the ass, and it'll be the equivalent of 2 or 3 cups. Is it that sort of coffee?
Well, there's 2 different types that I have. There is a dark roast, which is pretty much, it has a nice kick to it. And then there is more of a medium roast, which I split it into 2 different colors. The purple will give you a kick in the ass. The red is a more milder blend. And then we're working on some other ones too, but these are the initial 2 that I put out. And every time I give some to someone or someone buys it and they just say, "Dude, this is fucking killer." So I love hearing, feedback.
They call you at 3 a.m. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks. I'm wide awake.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to try some of this. I'm a huge coffee fan. I need to make sure that I'll try a little bit of it first just to make sure it doesn't completely go against my doctor's advice. But I'm glad to see you. See you still doing it. Now you guys are about to go out on tour. You're doing well? You healthy?
Yeah. For the most part, I'm all good. I just have a problem with my hand that comes up every once in a while, but for the most part, I'm good.
Are there any songs that you're struggling to play these days? Because I know, a lot of the stuff is really taxing, especially on drummers. Anything you have to kind of cut from the set or put toward the beginning while you still have the energy?
No, it's not really like that. I mean, when we get into the 2.5, 3 week period of a tour, that's when my hand starts to act up again, and I just need to rest it.
All right. Well, good to hear you're in good health, and you guys are on tour and still kicking ass. Looking forward to the whatever recordings you guys end up doing shortly. Also want to remind folks that the 30th anniversary of Spreading the Disease is out there. It's a double disc set with a bunch of outtakes, a bunch of live stuff. Really sounds beautiful. Mastered very, very well. Sounds like you're having a state of euphoria 30th edition coming out too, so looking forward to that and all the goodies that comes with it. Make sure to check out Charlie's Coffee at charliebenante.com. I'll put links on the vinylguide.com website, and let's all get caffeinated together. What do you say, Charlie?
Woohoo! Yeah. Sounds good to me.